Hey y'all, Zeth here. I remember it so you don't have to. Currently I'm compiling a list of Japanese kaiju based on smell. Don't question. I'd say King Caesar is a solid F, while Anguirus, give him a solid A.
So originally I was going to make 5 separate videos covering the history of Godzilla. The thing is, my script was long and overdrawn. We're talking over 1,000 pages just for one of these videos, and I would have probably not even been ready till late 2024. So instead, this entire year is the 70th anniversary of Godzilla, and to commemorate that, I have taken it upon myself to have a retrospective on every single movie that's a part of Toho's legendary franchise. Once every single video is complete, I can re-edit them into their respective eras. I'm not promising or saying that there's an order I'll have. One week it might be a Showa movie and the next it might be a MonsterVerse one. Godzilla is my favorite franchise of all time. So to celebrate his 70th anniversary, let's kick it off with one of my personal favorites, 1989's Godzilla vs. Biollante.
When it comes to Godzilla fans, most of us point to the 1954 film, or even something like Shin Godzilla as being one of the best. I'm not one of those people.
Those movies are good and they have their place, don't get me wrong, but Godzilla vs. Biollante is one of the most overlooked and forgotten Godzilla films. It has some of my favorite moments in the franchise's history, and honestly, the poster for it scared the crap out of me as a kid. Godzilla VHS cover tapes are awesome, and this image was always way more better than the one with the suits. That goes for almost all of the Heisei era art. Godzilla vs. Biollante was the second in the Heisei era of the series, coming after the Return of Godzilla or Godzilla 1985. I always remember Godzilla vs. Biollante as being one of the strongest that the franchise has put out, and one of the most unique. As someone who grew up watching these movies and can quote them inside out and backwards, I'm kind of sick of the reused monsters now. You know the main three, Rodan, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. I know it's weird to say this in the fandom space, but it's almost always that now. It's nice when there's a new cool spin on them, but my favorite monsters have always been the ones that show up only once or twice in the series, and Biollante is one that has never appeared again. After this, there was only a little bit of archive footage in Space Godzilla, and it's the story explanation for his birth.
There were only 2 occasions when G-cells were sent into outer space. 1, a fragment of Biollante, and 2, Godzilla's flesh attached to Mothra.
Biollante's appeared in comics, books, and games, but I want Biollante to return officially. That's what they should have done in the aftermath of that Jet Jaguar short. The two shake hands as a new threat appears. Ugh. Seriously, why is it always King Ghidorah? Anyways, why is Godzilla vs. Biollante so good and underrated? Well, I think to start, it's because it's one of the strangest Godzilla movies. You either love this one or you hate it. I've never heard anything in between. This is also rare in that it's a direct sequel to The Return of Godzilla. While that goes for all of the Heisei films, at this point and even later ones with the Showa era or even the Millennium era, Godzilla would have sequels, but then they would have the ones that would branch off or be its own thing. What's cool about the Heisei era is that you can start from The Return of Godzilla and go all the way up to Godzilla vs. Destroyer, and it has a consistent story about this specific Godzilla. For a sequel, Godzilla vs. Biollante does everything right and what a Godzilla movie should do. More interesting and better characters, a unique monster for Godzilla to fight in ways we have never seen before, a score to rival that of Inception, with one of the songs becoming a meme recently. I have always loved the score for Biollante. Koichi Sugiyama was the film's composer, and while this is his only Godzilla film he composed solely, he had worked in the past on Godzilla vs. Hedorah using the Defeat Hedorah theme song specifically. Other than that, he's known for one series in particular, scoring the entire mainline series. That's right, the series composer of Dragon Quest, one of, if not the most popular role-playing game of all time. Once you have that in mind, this soundtrack makes a whole lot more sense. It's kind of a weird combination where it can be fun and over the top, to devastating, chaotic, and horrifying. It fits the tone of the film amazingly, and it also used the original themes from Akira Ikefube in some of the best ways any Godzilla movie has utilized them.
Well, that's great. All right, now, children, let us see what you dreamed of, okay?
When it comes to the story of the development, it's pretty interesting. After the marginal success of The Return of Godzilla in 1984, Toho held a public writing contest for the sequel. From it was born an entry from a dentist, out of all people, Shinichiro Kobayashi, which wasn't his first time doing this. Back in high school, he had submitted nearly 13 monster designs and story ideas, which one was selected for a Return of Ultraman episode, and he also wrote a draft for a film later too called Godzilla vs. Neo-Godzilla, which built upon the Godzilla vs. Astro-Godzilla idea. His story idea for Biollante has a few differences from the movie we have now. For starters, while the Frankenstein monster experiments from Dr. Shiragami are relatively the same, there was going to be another monster called Deuteolos. It was basically a giant rat monster that was a mix of animal and fish DNA, and it went on a rampage earlier on in the film and was killed and eaten by Godzilla. But now in the final film is now the Rose form battle and the Super X fight, which I'm glad because the Rose form of Biollante is one of my favorite kaiju and it is terrifying. Biollante was also just a mix of Erica and plant DNA, not Godzilla cells. Biollante would have had a more human face as well during the final instead of the crocodile Venus flytrap look that we have. If you're wanting to see some amazing artwork, check out some of the pre-production art of Biollante's design. It's always cool to see how Toho's designs evolve over time, especially with this kaiju. There was going to be some journalist character that we followed as well who would have had psychic visions over the course of the film that leads to her confronting Dr. Shiragami for his horrific creations. This was replaced with the character Miki Sagusa, who would appear in every remaining Heisei Godzilla movie. I think that while some of this stuff is cool to read about, I think the Dr. Shiragami that we have in the final movie is way better. Here, yes, in the original script he's lost his mind after the death of his daughter, but now he's turned more into a villain with the creation of more than one monster. I like how in the final film, while yes, he's crazy, he's constructed and mixed plant, Godzilla, and human cells, you see more so of how it was just this accident and science gone wrong. He's more so a fallen hero in the final film. Same goes for the rat creature. Sure, it's cool when Godzilla fights two totally different monsters, but man, that Rose battle is still one of my favorite fights that Godzilla has, and it really shows off the skills of the Suitmation and VFX crew. They thought that they wouldn't be able to do some of this stuff in the script with practical suits, so they did some stop motion which was left on the cutting room floor after special effects director Koichi Kawakita thought that they failed to blend in with the live action footage. Other cut scenes were once Godzilla defeated Biollante's Rhodes stage, the spores would have covered the hillside and begin blooming in the fields. The reason that this was cut, though, was due to the flowers being out of scale, which, I guess it's a little silly, I don't know, monster flowers? Who cares? It's a pretty good scene, and it shows a little bit of character of Godzilla. Another cut scene was too when they were going to use animation for Biollante consuming Godzilla near the end of the film. The director of Godzilla vs. Biollante would take the next 3 years to modify the dentist's story into a script while working on other Toho movies. Now, when it comes to Biollante and filming, it was actually quite difficult with the forms. While the Rose form's head was easy for the most part, the difficulty with it was with the vines, and that was the reason for the stop motion being considered for a few scenes. The final form of Biollante was even more difficult with its vine network, taking hours to rig up and nearly took 32 people to operate. Godzilla in this movie took on a new design too, which is by far one of my favorite ways he has looked. He looks more animal and less cartoony. I love the design that they had in the previous film, but this just looks so much better and it fits the tone of the movie more. The tone of the movie, too, is one of my favorites. It has a solid mix of both goofy and serious. 1 minute we're in a serious fight to the BioWars soundtrack. It's fun all the way through. There's nothing that I can really complain about in this movie. I overall think it's well paced. There's a solid story here while you're not getting bored of the human characters. In fact, if you replace Godzilla in this movie with a generic other kaiju or like someone like Gamera, oh, Gamera, we'll come to you eventually. You still have a good movie here. Just to sum up the movie real quickly, after Godzilla was trapped in Mount Mahara, some of Godzilla's cells were discovered and are delivered to a research lab in Saradia. They want to merge Godzilla's cells with that of a plant to hopefully create a grain that can be planted in the desert. I would have loved to see that pitch.
You want a what?
A terrorist, however, bombs the building and kills a scientist's daughter. We flash forward 5 years and Dr. Shiragami has become a shallow, hollow version of himself. He's always depressed looking and has lost his mind because he merged some of his daughter's cells with that of some roses. I love Dr. Shiragami here. He's played by actor Koji Takahashi and does an excellent job. You feel the life is just sucked out of him, and now he basically shows no emotion whatsoever, even with something that would spur something like that. Basically, he gets back a hold of the Godzilla cells after agreeing to use them to create an anti-nuclear energy bacteria to kill Godzilla should he ever return. Spoilers, he does. I always get this goofy smile when a scene like this always happens. The music booming, Godzilla's roar to the excellent physical explosions. This is pure Godzilla. During this, Dr. Shiragami merges some of the Godzilla cells with that of the rose to see if he could create an immortal plant to preserve Erica's soul. Instead, he created the plant monster, Biollante. I have always loved the buildup of Biollante in this movie, especially when it's growing. It's horrific with some weird, freaky music. The plant escapes into a nearby lake where it has grown into a kaiju-sized monster. This is horrifying. I love every aspect of the first form of Biollante, and I like it better than the second form. A fight goes down with Godzilla blowing up Biollante, but it's revealed that she's immortal and her spores fly up into space. Throughout the entire movie, however, there's this character named Miki Sugusa who has psychic abilities and can sense things like Godzilla or Biollante. She uses her powers to divert Godzilla to Osaka, who is on his way to a power plant. Godzilla rampages through Osaka, and it's one of my favorite Godzilla moments in the franchise. I think that there's a lot of great human shots and perspective angles, and everything is enveloped in flames. It's a good mood. The plan basically is to fire the ANEB at Godzilla using rockets. One of them is fired directly into Godzilla's mouth.
All this intravenous stuff's no good for you. Stick to smoking.
But they realize, however, it's not working due to Godzilla's low temperature, so they devise a plan to raise it by using these microwave plates that can superheat. The plan starts to go sideways, and just as it does, Biollante reappears. Like I said, I don't really like this design as much as the previous one. I think that the facelessness of the rose is scarier than this version, but it's still a cool monster design. Again, the shots here are superb. I love that this is more of a violent battle than most Godzilla fights. Biollante really has no chance. She spits up acid on Godzilla, which causes his temperature to rise, and he stumbles out of the battle and falls into water like a drunken Aquaman. Biollante then dissolves herself and flies into space. The movie ends with Godzilla rising in the ocean once again, and the credits roll. Obviously, I'm leaving out some big key plot points, like how there is this James Bond Seradian guy.
It's that Seradian agent again!
There was also a constant push and pull with the Godzilla cells and what to do with them. Godzilla vs. Biollante opened in Japan on December 16, 1989, just a month after it finished shooting in November. It was praised by critics for its story, characters, and how it was different from previous movies. While it did good at the box office, numbers just did not meet Toho's expectations. Godzilla vs. Biollante, I feel, has been in that obscure loop of the franchise. It's one that doesn't feature a familiar monster. There's not really this big moment that has gone viral or remembered. It's just a good, solid movie that's taken pretty seriously for the most part. There is one scene that's pretty awesomely goofy, though. I think one of my favorite aspects of the film is the shots. Gareth Edwards, when he was making the 2014 Godzilla reboot, he wanted every monster shot to be that of a human perspective, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is maybe where he got some of his inspiration. There's a lot of wide and long shots where you can see humans right in the perspective of the monster, or there's some where you're even looking up at them. I just love the editing and the tone of this movie as well. You can clearly see all of the fights, even though they can be chaotic at times. You know where A and B is. You're never questioning where everyone is in relativity to one another. Biollante is hands down one of the best Godzilla foes, and it's a shame she's never really come back, even in Final Wars. While yes, I think that the first form is better, it's still so impressive that this is all hand puppeted and made. I really do miss the suitmation effects with Godzilla compared to CGI Godzilla. I also think that it was cool that this was one of the first to be released in America uncut. Sometimes, not always, there's very key differences between the American and the Japanese version of a Godzilla movie. For this, Miramax released the uncut version of the movie with an American dub, and for the most part, it's actually pretty good. I don't think it's super cheesy or overly dramatic. Sure, there's a few lines that stumble.
Japan has suffered devastation brought by nuclear bombers. And now there's Godzilla.
But I'd say it's pretty good no matter what version you watch, Japanese or American. One thing to mention too is that this is the first time you see Godzilla use his nuclear pulse, something that comes back again and again. I don't mind it here, but I have never really been a big fan of the nuclear pulse. I don't mind Godzilla getting new powers, but later down the road, it just feels like an easy out explanation for Godzilla devastating an enemy. The soundtrack, once again, is one of my favorites. I cannot stress that enough. It's goofy, but it can be horrifying and dynamic, too.
For me, Godzilla vs. Biollante will always go down as one of my favorite Godzilla movies, and honestly, I don't think it gets the recognition it deserves.
While Biollante gets recognized, I don't think the movie does or gets highly praised for the most part.
I highly recommend this one, especially if you're looking for one of the more serious Godzilla movies. Now, Biollante, where do you rank? Give it a solid C.